Good morning, dear students. Today we will continue with our cohort studies. Yesterday you have learnt the indications, types of cohort studies, elements of cohort studies, and in elements you have seen the first four steps, that is selection of study subjects and obtaining data on exposure among the cohorts and comparison groups, and selection of comparison groups and follow-up. Today we will continue with our next part of the element, that is analysis. In cohort studies, we calculate incidence rates of outcome among exposed and non-exposed. Now this estimation of risk is done by two, that is relative risk and attributable risk. In a cohort study, we determine the incidence rate directly in the exposed and those who are not exposed. I have given a table for your understanding easily. Here in this table, you can see the total people are 10,000 who are chewers of tobacco, and there is another 10,000 who are non-chewers of the tobacco. Now this is cohort and control group. If you see, that is risk factor present in chewers and there is no chewing of tobacco in other group. Now among the chewers there are 45 people who had developed oral cancer, and among the non-chewers there are 5 people who had developed the oral cancer. Let us calculate the incidence rates among these two. Now incidence of oral cancer among those exposed and non-exposed. Now among the exposed it is 4.5 per thousand, whereas among non-exposed that is 0.5 per thousand. Now if you see this calculation of incidence rates, after the calculation what we do is we go to the relative risk. That is relative risk is the incidence of disease among, that is the ratio of incidence of disease among exposed and the incidence of disease among non-exposed. Now this is given by a formula, that is incidence of disease among exposed by incidence of disease among non-exposed, that is 4.5 by 0.5, that makes it 9. This implies that those people who are chewing tobacco are at 9 times higher the risk of developing oral cancer than those people who are not chewing tobacco. Now this estimation of relative risk is important mainly in the etiological factors or etiological inquiries, because it is a direct measure of strength of association between the suspected cause and disease. Now a relative risk, now let us see the interpretation of relative risk. If the relative risk is 1, it indicates there is no association between the suspected cause and effect. Whereas if it is greater than 1, it suggests there is a positive association between the exposure and disease under study. Now if the relative risk is 2, it indicates that the rate of disease, the incidence rate of disease is twice higher in the exposed group than compared to those unexposed group. It is often useful to say 95% confidence interval of relative risk, because it indicates the maximum level of risk. Larger the relative risk, greater the strength of association between the suspected factor and disease. Now coming to the attributable risk. What is attributable risk? It is the difference in incidence rate of disease between an exposed group and non-exposed group. It is often expressed in percentage. If you see the formula wise, incidence of disease rate among exposed minus incidence of disease rate among non-exposed by the incidence rate among exposed into 100. That makes it taking the previous values of the table, it becomes 88.9%. That is, attributable risk indicates to what extent the disease under study can be attributed to the exposure. Now, if you see this example, the explanation is 88.9% is attributed to tobacco chewing in the development of cancer among the chewers. This suggests that the amount of disease that might be eliminated if the factor is controlled or eliminated. That means this much of population or in the cohort group can be eliminated if the tobacco chewing is controlled. Now, population attributable risk. It is the incidence of the disease in the total population minus the incidence of disease among those who were not exposed to the suspected causal factor. The concept of attributable risk is useful. Population attributable risk is useful in that it provides an estimate of the amount by which the disease could be reduced in that population if the suspected factor was modified or eliminated. So, the attributable risk will help us in how to reduce the disease burden among the population if that particular suspected factor is controlled. Let us see the relative risk versus attributable risk. Relative risk is important in etiological inquiries because it tells you the strength of the association. The stronger the association, the larger the relative risk, stronger the association between the cause and effect. But the relative risk does not reflect the potential public health importance as attributable risk. That is, the impact of successful preventive measures followed or public health program implemented in reducing the problem can be assessed only by the attributable risk. Now coming to the later part, that is potential bias in cohort studies. You have seen bias in case control studies. So here we will see the bias in cohort studies. The first one is bias from non-response and follow-up, loss of follow-up. Now, if you see the loss of follow-up, that is, you call it as attrition problem. When we have the people who are losing interest or who are not available for the follow-up to get information, then definitely you lose the information that is to be gathered from those people because they are not participating. That is the reason they have loss of follow-up. This bias can happen. Now coming to information bias. Now this information bias happens if the quality and the details of the information that we collect from the exposed persons and non-exposed persons are different. This kind of bias is usually seen in historical cohort studies. It can be seen in normal also, but most commonly seen in historical cohort studies. The next coming to confounding bias. Now this confounding bias is when there is information gathered is inappropriate from both cohorts and comparison groups. So this is a confounding bias. We have seen the confounding word in the previous part of the studies also. So confounding bias happen there also. So next coming to the post hoc bias, or we can call it as analytic bias. This happens because the epidemiologists or statisticians, whoever is analyzing the data, they have a strong preconceptions. That is, unintentionally they introduce these kind of biases during the data analysis and they get a misinterpretation of the study findings. This is a bias which can be avoided because they should not do any kind of data dredging. So these are the potential bias you can experience in cohort studies. Now let us see the advantages of cohort studies. The main advantage is you can study the incidence or you can calculate the incidence from cohort studies. And at the same time, several possible outcomes also can be studied simultaneously. Now, cohort studies provide a direct estimate of relative risk. Dose response ratio also can be calculated. That is, this much of dose and this much of response is like, suppose for an example, if a person is smoking so many packets of cigarettes, and he can land up in so many problems, or so such a kind of a lung cancer, or duration of the lung cancer happening in that population or in that particular people can be calculated. So dose response can be calculated. And next is the comparison groups are, since the comparison groups are formed before the disease happening in those people, certain forms of bias can be minimized, like misclassifications of individuals into exposed and unexposed. That is, selection bias can be minimized. Now coming to the disadvantages. These cohort studies involve large number of people. They are generally unsuitable for investigating uncommon diseases or diseases with low incidence in the population. That means these are not suitable for rare disease studies. It takes long time to complete the study and obtain results. Usually it can extend up to 20 to 30 years or even more in kind of cancer studies. And certain administrative problems such as loss of experienced staff, loss of funding, and extensive record keeping are inevitable in these cohort studies. And they are not unusual to lose a substantial proportion of cohorts. That is, attrition problems are very high in cohort studies. They may migrate or lose interest in the study or simply refuse to provide any information required, which can lead to information bias. And lastly, they are quite expensive. Let us move on to the differences between case control and cohort studies. Now, as you all know, case control studies proceeds from effect to cause, that is retrospectively, whereas cohort studies proceeds from cause to effect. In case control studies, it starts with the disease, whereas in cohort studies, it starts with the exposure. That is, it starts with the people exposed to the risk factor or suspected cause. And then we go to see the outcome. Here you can see, test whether the suspected cause more frequently happening in those with the disease than with those without the disease. Whereas in cohort studies, we see whether the disease occurs more frequently in those exposed than in those not exposed. Usually the first approach to the testing of hypothesis, but also useful for exploratory studies, whereas cohort studies are reserved mainly to test the hypothesis. Now, it involves fewer number of subjects in a case control study, whereas large number of subjects are involved in cohort studies. Now, case control studies yields quick results, definitely, whereas cohort studies takes long time and it is involving delayed results. Case control studies are suitable for rare diseases study, whereas cohort studies are not suitable for rare disease. That is inappropriate when the disease or exposure under investigation is rare. In cohort studies, generally yields only the information about diseases other than that selected for the study. Whereas here, incidence rates, relative risk and attributable risk are available. That means here it's only the odds ratio, whereas in cohort studies you can study relative risk and attributable risk. Here cohort studies, case control studies cannot yield information about diseases other than that selected for the study, because we are selecting the diseased people and we are going back. Whereas in cohort studies, they can yield more information about any other diseases other than the one which we are studying about the disease outcome, because we are following the people, we are going prospectively. And finally, case control studies are relatively inexpensive and cohort studies are definitely more expensive compared to case control studies. So these are all the differences between case control and cohort studies. I hope you all have understood the cohort studies as well as the differences between case control and cohort studies. The differences part is a separate question, as it is can be asked separately, and cohort studies can be asked as a major question also. So please do study well and try to understand and refer books also, and if you have any more doubts you can get back to me. Thank you.